According to reports, the United States has openly opposed South Africa's G20 presidency, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio announcing he will boycott next week's ministerial meetings in Johannesburg. The move, alongside President Donald Trump's decision to cut U.S. financial aid to Pretoria, casts doubt on the effectiveness of the G20 as a platform for global economic cooperation and the growth of South Africa and poorer African economies. Analysts suggest Washington's stance is aimed at undermining South Africa's leadership and its economic position, potentially limiting progress on key issues such as inequality, sovereign debt relief, and climate change. We are joined by Professor Andre Roux, who is an economist at Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to all your viewers.
And you're welcome. So does the lack of support from the U.S. at this crucial time derail the importance and usefulness of South Africa's G20 presidency?
Yes, I think we need to see this along with a few other recent announcements, presidential orders by Donald Trump, ranging from threatening, obviously, tariffs, threatening AGOA, our continued membership of that. And then on top of all of that, as you just pointed out, seemingly questioning and even asking whether G20 is a worthwhile body. I think that I'm afraid Donald Trump and his supporters see the G20 almost as a threat to the old G7. I think it's part of their view that they want to prevent the likes of China, India, and other larger nations from becoming too dominant in the world economy. So I think it's part of a much bigger picture. And unfortunately, South Africa is caught in the crossfire, as it were. So it's not good news for South Africa, certainly. America is still one of our biggest trade partners after China when it comes to exports. They are big financiers of foreign aid to this country. We know about US aid perhaps being shut down, or certainly the tap being closed. That would have a bearing on research into HIV and AIDS and HIV and AIDS medication, amongst other things. On the more positive side, from a South African point of view, it looks as if some of the other key members of the G20 have come to seem to be on our side. I see recently the president of the EU said that they wholeheartedly support South Africa, and they will certainly endorse our continued membership and, for this year, chairpersonship of the G20.
Okay, so with these geopolitical tensions playing out, we still cannot downplay the fact that this aggression stems from President Ramaphosa's land redistribution policy and the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. What do you make of these?
Yes, I think the land bill is not the sole or even perhaps the major contributor. It's just part of an arsenal of things that Trump is using. So we could argue that as far as he is concerned, any friend of his enemy is an enemy of him. So with South Africa supporting, seemingly, China, supporting Russia, and as you say, anti-Israel, this all goes against his way of thinking. And he is kind of saying to us, well, if you support those causes, those countries, and they are our enemies, then by implication, you're also our enemy. And we want you to change your stance. Now, just adding to this, the land requisition bill, I think in some ways it's being quoted out of context. It has been misunderstood. There's no way that our government is saying that all land will be grabbed with no compensation. It's just making that a possibility in extreme cases. But we're not looking at a Zimbabwe-like situation, not at all. They will only be allowed to take land, the government, in the interest of public interest. Now that could mean to build new roads. So I don't think we look in a situation where all land, all privately owned land, is going to be grabbed and taken away willy-nilly. In most cases, if it does happen, it will be on a willing buyer, willing seller basis.
So,
But he's grabbed this opportunity. Trump has grabbed this as an excuse to say that our legislation is discriminating against some members of society. He's over-exaggerating all of that.
but then, Professor Rowe, looking at it from the angle of what is of public interest, we understand that South Africa is a sovereign nation, but does South Africa really have any business with U.S. alliance with a country, most especially Israel in this case, and the issues that have happened in the Middle East?
But did you repeat your question? Do we have any?
Yes, I'm asking if South Africa has any interest or if it's of importance to South Africa having to wade into the issue that U.S. has an alliance with Israel in the escalation of violence we see play out in the Middle East.
Well, no, it's not so much about that. I think it's that, as you know, in the course of last year, South Africa took the case to the International Criminal Court and won the case, by the way. Demanding that Israel should cease their hostilities. And many countries supported that. In terms of economic interests, we've had a long history, a legacy of being involved with Israel, especially going back to the pre-94 period. And it's a complicated one, I mean, as it is for any country, the Middle East story. But essentially, we are seen as being more in alliance with countries such as Iran and Iraq, especially Iran, also perhaps a member of BRICS in the days going forward. And that goes against the grain of Trump's thinking.
All right, Professor Rowe, on a broader scale, it is thought that this friction will make it impossible for poorer nations, especially in Africa, to break even economically, with South Africa presiding over G20. Do you think so?
No, I think, again, with or without that issue, Africa needs to be concerned about what might happen in terms of AGOA. And obviously, like any country, should be concerned about the imposition of tariffs on goods exported from Africa to the USA. It cannot be beneficial. Then we add to that the curb or the brakes being put on international aid, American aid to Africa. Aid is always controversial. One might argue that aid does more harm than good. One can become addicted to aid, but it is what it is. Many African countries need that aid from America and others. Now, a question might be, to what extent, if that aid from America and trade is cut off, will places like China and India and Russia sort of step into the gap? That will be an interesting development going forward. We don't know. We certainly know that China does have a vested interest in Africa because of our resources, but will they be willing to, as I say, plug the gap? That we'll have to see. I think we need to see Africa as being almost caught in the crossfire of a trade war between America and China, amongst others. And unfortunately, we are fairly small in the world economy, barely 5%, talk about Africa. And I'm afraid that we are very vulnerable to disruptions in international trade, world trade, and we could be on the receiving end. I think therefore the strategy ought to be for South Africa to diplomatically and quietly, without becoming emotional, trying to fix our relationships with America. We do need their largesse. We can't do without it. But go about it quietly, diplomatically. Don't make knee-jerk announcements on television and all kinds of strange and temperamental stories. Just be calm, follow a political diplomatic process.
Professor Rowe, having to repair the relationship with America would definitely mean South Africa expunging its expropriation act and trying as much as possible to dance to the tunes of the West. Is that the implication of what you're asking for?
No, I don't think we should dance to the tunes. No, I think that we just need to perhaps be less aggressive and arrogant in saying things such as, we don't need you, America. And especially not saying that in public. I don't think it's necessary to change the act for that reason. There might be other reasons. As I say, I think it's more about ensuring that people like Donald Trump really understand what the act is saying and don't just read one or two clauses out of context. I'm not even sure that he himself has read the act. Maybe some of his advisors are reading it out of context, and then he is grabbing that. So I think it's more about ensuring a mutual understanding what all these things are all about. As it is, we seem to be sharing half-truths and twisted versions of what's really happening. So diplomatically, behind the scenes, sit down and have a decent, solid conversation and explain to each other what these things are really saying.
And I understand why you will say that, because this is the first time that an African country will be leading the G20. So having a safe and a smooth transition and administration will be beneficial not only to South Africa, but of course the African continent. Professor Andre Roux, an economist at Stellenbosch Business School, thank you so much for your time on the show.